Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are now doing the second half of the show solo, and I want to start off here by talking about some of the NBA awards that were handed out over the past few days. We had Victor Wembanyama being named Rookie of the Year, Rudy Gobert as Defensive Player of the Year, and Nikola Jokic as MVP. Really, none of these were all too shocking, but did want to just sort of do a little bit of a recap here and talk about the overall bigger picture with some of this stuff. So Wembanyama wins Rookie of the Year. Again, it seemed like this was a competition up through probably January, maybe even before that, where Wemby did look like a lot more raw version of himself than what we saw, fully formed by the end of the year. And for Chet, the odds were always going to be stacked against him from both the perspective of the fact that he was going up against this generational player, and there was so much buzz around Wembanyama coming into the year. Ultimately, I don't think that it was sort of a media buzz voting in order for him to get this. It was fully earned. He was absolutely incredible throughout the second half of the year especially, and his counting stats would back that up. Averaged 21 points per game along with 10 rebounds, while also leading the NBA in assists, or in blocks, I should say. He added additionally 4 assists with that, but Wembanyama, we already know. We've heard about it a million times, the way that he is going to be a big-time riser, potential face of the league candidate as the years move on here. I do think that the Spurs have a real obligation to him this offseason to be able to put a legitimate point guard with him. The whole Jeremy Sohan experiment, and listen, I'm not as low on people. I'm not as low as on him as a lot of people are. I was also never necessarily a believer in him coming into the NBA, but they totally mismanaged him this past year. I understand that he has some qualities that can make him a little bit more of a point forward, archetype, but putting him as the full-on point guard in just, I believe, his second year, unless it was his third. He was on that championship Baylor team, so I believe he was drafted in 2022. But I thought that was just a really poor job. Again, I'm not going to dive into it too much, but there is a little bit of an interesting Greg Popovich conversation in terms of, we just saw Bill Belichick go through, the ups and downs of this post-Tom Brady era, and everybody believes in him as the coach, but can he, the general manager and the person putting these teams together actually come through and be a somebody who can lead this next generation? I believe that Popovich has done loads for Wembanyama in his rookie year, so by no means am I trying to tear him down, but I think from a personnel perspective, and I don't know if he has the exact position title of general manager. I'll double check that right now, but we know that he is definitely involved in the decisions now. So Brian Wright is the general manager, but I think that ultimately for Popovich, it is going to be interesting to see whether or not he is able to put together a good enough roster that can maximize Wembanyama's talents. I'm not of the mindset at all of Wemby's going to ask his way out. I know that was a narrative that, frankly, ESPN was pushing a little bit during the middle of the season. Love to see the competitiveness from Wemby, but I think that he can have his time to develop and sort of work his way into a winning system, but I would definitely prefer to see it sooner rather than later, so hopefully they figure themselves out. Rudy Gobert won Defensive Player of the Year. Again, not really much of a surprise. I know that there was a lot of pushing for Wembanyama to win the award as well, and I was very torn on it. Ultimately, when I did my show, I leaned in the direction of Wembanyama, but at the same time, I don't think it is egregious by any means that Gobert wins this. Wemby had the counting stats that sort of pushed it forward, but Gobert was ultimately, if you're looking at a full season's worth of experience, Gobert was better throughout. Wemby, and he was dealing with injuries that were sort of limiting how much he could even be on the court. Took a while for him to make his impact on the Spurs team, and the Spurs were very bad defensively outside of him, which is ultimately why I leaned in the direction of Wembanyama. The difference of how much better the defense was with him on the court was just, so mind-boggling to me that when I was looking at the numbers, I myself couldn't, make an argument for Gobert, but I do fully understand it as well. I know that a lot of basketball fans are upset with it, but Gobert, he ends up winning his 4th Defensive Player of the Year award in his career, one of 3 players to ever do so, putting himself really in conversation for, I think that even with 3, he was already sort of in that, you can call it at least a little bit comparable to the Dwight Howard career arc, at least some of the accomplishments. Now, Howard, I believe, had more All-Star appearances, and he ended up leading the Magic to a finals run. But, I mean, for Gobert, if you want to talk his legacy big picture here, he is on this Timberwolves team that is absolutely rolling coming into the matchup that they're going to be taking place. I believe they play tomorrow against the Denver Nuggets with a chance to take a 3-0 lead at home. So it seems like the Timberwolves are fully geared up to potentially make this finals run. And if he adds a ring to this, I don't think that there is any question. And I know that there's a lot of box score watchers out there who just sort of casually follow the game, but Gobert's impact does absolutely extend beyond that, and I'm glad that he's gotten this little bit of a redemption season after last year was really ugly. And he was not the same level of defender last year is the reality, but I think that now he has made some internal adjustments of being able to settle into this new role with Minnesota, and it has absolutely paid off for them. I know the price they paid was very expensive at the time, but ultimately it's looking like they, can definitely make something of this. And again, if you want to 10 years from now sort of have this argument of did they pay too much, the answer is probably going to be yes, but at the same time, if they come away with a championship, it is no complaints, especially for that type of a fan base who hasn't necessarily seen all too much postseason success. The love that city has for, feels like more like Anthony Edwards. Obviously, it's his team. It might even be his league in the coming years, but I definitely think that it's fun to see these sort of mid-market teams and the way that they've been able to show out in terms of postseason appearances the past couple of years. I know I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but Minnesota, Oklahoma City, and that crowd situation is one of the best in professional sports from what I've seen recently. Maybe I'm getting caught up in that recency bias, but the Lou Dort chants, the entire stadium barking anytime Jalen Williams does something, it just makes me laugh as I watch these games, and it is definitely, an infectious feeling there in Oklahoma City. And then I also want to give credit to, obviously, Sacramento, Beam Team Stand Up, for the job that they did last year in helping to elevate their team. I'll never forget the run that they made in, I forget exactly what game it is, so this is going to be a point that sort of falls by the wayside here, but it was in one of the comebacks that they potentially made. I just remember seeing the crowd so into the game. They were down by 20 points early in the fourth quarter. I believe it was one of the Milwaukee Bucks games. Again, apologize, I don't have it off the top of my head here, but the Keegan Murray chants raining, and they ended up putting together this run. I just feel like Sacramento, they have another great fan base there, and Indiana is the last one that I wanted to shout out. It's fun to see these sort of mid-markets, and obviously the Knicks crowd has been crazy, but that's New York. That was a little bit expected. But final award here that I wanted to touch on was Nikola Jokic winning the MVP. I thought that this was the pretty clear-cut choice, and obviously the fact that he's getting awarded this as the Nuggets are down 0-2 is just another example of the NBA awards. They just need to figure out how to work out this rollout better. Last day of the regular season was April 14th. It was 5+ days until the playoffs officially started. April 20th was the first actual playoff games. We had some play-in games during the week there, but even Thursday was off. Just make it work at some point during that stretch. So the MVP award isn't coming with these artificial asterisks right now because Shea is still in the playoffs and, leading his team to a very solid run, and Jokic just sort of gets looked down upon because of the fact that he is down 0-2 right now. It's just a ridiculous gripe that I have with the NBA. But voting results were sort of straightforward here. It was Jokic getting 79 first-place votes, SGA with 15, Luka with 4, and Giannis got 1 in there as well. So I know that a lot of people were sort of pushing the agendas of SGA and Luka, and look, they had incredible seasons. Both of them are going to be first-team All-NBA, so it's not like it's any sort of conversation about the fact that they weren't deserving of being in the conversation. But best player in the NBA this year was easily Jokic, and he helped lead his team to just as many wins, if I'm not mistaken, as the Oklahoma City Thunder did. So ultimately you look at that 1 seed, and I think that people sort of overreact to that. They both won 57 games. And yes, Shea gets home court advantage if they were to face off in the in the playoffs here, but I just don't put as much stock into that overall seeding number as other people maybe do. But Jokic joins a list of players with at least 3 MVPs. It's now him, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Michael Jordan, Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, LeBron James, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and Moses Malone. So just quite the impressive company there to be at this point, and doing so in my opinion, the most loaded in terms of talent era in NBA history. And I think that a lot of people, again, are going to try and diminish the Jokic situation because of the position they are currently in, but I am not going to be one of those people. But I do want to sort of talk some bigger picture ramifications of how the NBA playoffs could play out here through the final couple rounds. So we're going to be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, I want to talk about that. So stick with us, and we will be right back.